This video is sponsored by Artlist.
The Leica Q3 is one of my all-time favorite cameras, and it has some significant improvements from its predecessors. For $6,000, you get access to the legendary Summilux lens, a 60 megapixel sensor, and improved autofocus. On paper, it's also an extremely capable video camera with the addition of a log picture profile and ability to record 10-bit 8K up to 30 frames per second or 10-bit 422 in 4K up to 60 frames per second. But does this little overpriced powerhouse actually live up to that spec sheet? Well, I tried to make a short film using only the Leica Q3 to put it to the test. Let's get into it. So here's how this video is going to go. First, I want to quickly walk through my video setup for the Q3. Then I'll show you that short film I put together, and we'll kind of use that as a discussion point for some of the kind of pros and cons for the Q3 in terms of video performance. What I've done is I've programmed one of the function buttons to be user profiles. Now I set user profile 1 to be my photo mode, user profile 2 is set to 4K 24, and then profile 3 is set to 4K 60. For the rest of the video settings, rather than listing them all off, I'll just show you them here and you can pause it if you need to. I've opted to use 4K over 8K because this gives us 422 chroma subsampling, whereas we only get 420 with the 8K. For autofocus, I've found that either zone or subject tracking tends to work the best, depending on if you have a human subject or not. When filming on the Leica Q3, we have a few options for the actual physical setup. Of course, the simplest way would be to just have it configured as is, which is probably what most people will opt for, since the point of the Q3 is to be kind of an everyday carry camera that's slung around your shoulder at all times. Still, you're going to need an ND filter if you want to dial in your exposure correctly. I actually do things a little bit differently than what I think most others would do. I use a 49 to 67 millimeter step-up ring, and then I use a Polar Pro variable ND filter on top of that. The reason I opt for this is because 67 actually fits the barrel of the lens much nicer, which I think looks a lot better aesthetically, but it also helps for more easily rotating the filter without getting your fingers in the shot, because 49 millimeters is pretty tiny and it's kind of hard to actually grasp that on the front of the lens. As a side note, if I'm not shooting video, I'm basically always using the 67 millimeter short stash everyday filter on my Q3. It gives the images a really nice bloom on the highlights and adds polarization at the same time. One nice thing about the Q3 versus previous versions is you have an HDMI port, albeit a micro HDMI. Usually I rail on micro HDMI, but for a camera this small, it makes the most sense. But that did get me thinking, what if I built out a little cine rig using the Q3? After a little bit of tinkering, I ended up with this little, I think we'd call it a monstrosity. And that's basically what I used for this little short film we put together. If you want a full breakdown of this rig, let me know in the comments and I'll put something together in a separate video for you. But the main idea was to give it some more weight, to kind of give it a little more natural handheld look, and also that gives us access to a larger external monitor. Okay, now that we have this setup dialed in, let's take a look at this little short film I put together, and then we can use that as an example of some areas where the Q3 excels and falls short.
As the sun dipped low over the winding mountain road, it began to cast long shadows on the rugged landscape. He took it all in as he gripped the wheel. Eyes full of stories and his loyal companion by his side. They journeyed through towering peaks, their bond growing with every mile. Without a final destination in mind, he decided to stop by a river. Its gentle flow whispering secrets of the earth. It was there he decided to stay a while, taking in the beauty of the moment with his faithful friend. He knew his friend would never let him down, because the unconditional love between a man and his camera, that can never be broken.
Now, one thing you may have noticed in that video is how much more epic that voiceover is in that film compared to my own voice. Well, you could probably have guessed that that's because I hired a professional voice actor to spice it up a little bit. Kind of. In actuality, that was generated by Artlist's new AI voiceover tool, and while I technically didn't hire a professional voice actor, Artlist did. They trained their AI models on actual professional actors that are exclusive to Artlist. They have 35 different voices to choose from, and then you can customize each one by emotional range, similarity to the original voice, and then style boost as well. The one that I used is called Rural, since it kind of fit that road trip vibe that I was going for, but there's others that are more suited for explainer videos or documentary style videos, for example. All you gotta do is type in your script, adjust your settings, and then hit generate. The other really dope thing is that it's covered by Artlist's license, so you can use these for client projects to give your videos a really professional feel. So check out the link in the description to sign up, and if you use that link, you can get 2 additional months free with the purchase of a year subscription. All right, let's first talk about the things that I really enjoyed about the process of filming with the Q3 first, and then we'll talk about some of those drawbacks. First and foremost, the 28mm Summilux lens on the Q3 is a fantastic lens. If you were to buy this lens on its own for the M mount, it would cost around $8,000. It has really great micro contrast, really good color rendering, and is incredibly sharp, even wide open. And having that f1.7 aperture makes it great for subject separation and dealing with lower light situations. Now, being limited to 28mm has some drawbacks, but like with photo mode, you can adjust your frame electronically by cropping in to 35, 55, 75, or 90mm. When you do this in photo mode, it just adds like a little frame box around it, so it can be kind of hard to actually get the framing correct. But on video mode, once you hit record, it actually crops in and shows you that crop in the full screen. Now, the image quality is kind of the same as if you were to just like crop in post. So it's not like you're getting some new super resolution by doing that, but I did find it helpful for a lot of different framing when doing this little film. Another great thing about the Q3's video capability is the colors. With the addition of 10-bit 422 log recording, you now have a lot more latitude to edit in post. For this particular grade, I did a sort of Kodak Vision type look and kind of leaned into the greens rather than removing them like I often do. And the ability to actually adjust those greens is really nice with that 10-bit color. I also applied a Kodak 2383 profile within Dehancer, which effectively emulates as if you were to have printed out the video on that film stock. I've covered Dehancer a little bit in previous videos, but if you do want a more in-depth tutorial, let me know and I can put something together. I already sort of mentioned this off the top, but the build of the Q3 is also quite nice. While I did rig this up for this particular test, most of the time it's just gonna be carried around as is. Having that option of either being really robust or super portable is nice because it means that you can get a few clips wherever you are. Great thing about the small size is it makes it incredibly easy to do stuff like mount it to the car like we did for these driving scenes. This particular small rig car mount can handle just about any camera you throw on there, so it makes easy work of the Q3. I'll also link to the car mount in the description if you're interested. The Q3 also does have decent image stabilization, which helps quite a bit on the video front. However, we'll get into why it's not quite enough because the small size does present some drawbacks. So let's talk about those drawbacks for the Q3 in video mode. First and foremost, while the Q3 does have that micro HDMI port and finally has a USB-C port, it unfortunately does not have any audio interface. I know there's been some folks on the internet saying that perhaps a firmware update could make the USB-C port capable of capturing audio, but I haven't seen any indication that that is actually possible or is coming anytime soon. You can always record externally to something like a DJI Mic 2 or an external recorder like I'm doing right now, and then you could sync it in post, but that's certainly not ideal. For a video like this one, I did all of my sound design in post using a mixture of sound effects from Artlist or my own Whoosh sound effects pack. If you do want to download that Whoosh sound effects pack, it is completely free to do so at the link in the description, but if you want a free way to say thank you, you could consider hitting the subscribe button. Two other big upgrades to the Q3 from the Q2 are the new 60 megapixel sensor and the Maestro 4 processor that kind of work in combination to improve readout speed. On the photo side, these work really, really well together. On the video front, however, yikes. The rolling shutter on the Leica Q3 is honestly among the worst of any camera I have ever tested. The amount of jello effect and wiggle that you get, even at the smallest amount of movement, is honestly pretty brutal. Typically, I think most folks' critique of rolling shutter is a little bit overblown unless you're filming like fast action. But honestly, the Q3's rolling shutter makes even small little movements pretty disorienting. And because of that smaller size of the Q3, it actually is kind of difficult to keep stable enough and not experience some of those little micro jitters that are common when filming handheld. I also found the shadows to be pretty noisy on the Q3 at anything other than 400 ISO. Like, these two angles have the same settings at 800 ISO and the same controlled lighting. There's basically no noise on the FX3, but tons on the Leica Q3. It can be cleaned up with Resolve's noise reduction, but it's certainly more than you'd expect. Another big improvement that they've made to the Q3 is the new hybrid autofocus system and subject tracking. Again, this works really, really well on the photo side of things and is a big upgrade from the Q2. But on the video front, it is still leaving a lot to be desired when you're comparing it to like almost any other modern hybrid camera. The subject tracking does work decently well once it's locked on, and it can actually track a subject as it's moving a little bit throughout the frame here. Like, you know, this is tracking me here, over there. Yeah, it's okay, I think. I'll have to check the monitor and see if it's actually working. However, if it hasn't yet found a subject to focus on, or if you want to shift focus from one subject to another or one point to something else, it is pretty painful. It'll often focus hunt pretty badly. It misses much more often than it should. And even when it does nail the focus, that transition looks really mechanical and unflattering. Manual focus pulling, however, that is nice. It's a really short focus throw with it, you know, being like a rangefinder style, but at least you don't have to make too much movement to rack focus. So at least there's that. With all that in mind, should you actually consider this as a viable option as a video creative? Honestly, probably not. Despite the high price tag and the impressive specs on paper, if you want a camera for video, there are many dozens of better options out there. And most of them are much cheaper as well. But I do think that the Q3 remains one of my favorite photo cameras. My only hope was that it could be a tad bit more than that as well. Now, if you're a more photo-forward creative that just wants to be able to capture a couple of video clips here and there, maybe this could be enough for you. I think where it kind of performs the best is if your style is maybe a little bit more subdued. Maybe you like to have more static shots with minimal movement, or maybe you don't anticipate your subjects moving a ton and you're not planning to do some crazy focus pulling or anything like that. Then yeah, the image looks really nice and it's easy to bring around and it's pretty simple to use. And it takes great, great photos as well. With that, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.